Good afternoon. This is Margie Tatro with GridWorks, joined by my colleagues Jay Griffin and Deborah Shields, also from GridWorks. And we're conducting this question and answer session as a follow-up to the August 29th meeting on the SPS IRP and the facilitated stakeholder process. We know that there are some questions, and I'm going to turn the podium over to my colleague Jay Griffin in a moment, and we have the very capable SPS Excel team here to answer questions. Please be reminded that we are recording this meeting. Today is September the 6th, and we will have it available on the GridWorks website if people want to listen to the answers, or those who are not here wish to listen in as well. So with that, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being part of this process. And Jay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Margie. Thanks, everyone. This is Jay Griffin from GridWorks. And yeah, I think we went through how we had planned for this to work in our meeting last week. And so what we'd asked, one, I've gone through the recorded chat from the last meeting and pulled questions that either I didn't think were answered necessarily yet, or were not covered by some of the other subsequent questions that came in afterwards. So we have some follow-up questions that I'm going to post in a second that the SPS team, particularly Ben, will answer. I think some of you are in the room that pose those questions, so that'll be clear follow-up. And then we'd also ask people to submit questions by last Friday for this session. And the only questions we received were from PRC consultant Cynthia Mitchell. She had sent a couple iterations of those questions, so you'll see those in the chat as well in a second when I post that. And what we're going to do is go through the first set of questions that came from stakeholders last week, and then move to the PRC's questions. Some of those are asking repeat and going over topics that we had discussed in prior sessions. We're going to try and move some of those to the end. And just try and cover as much new territory as we can in this hour and stick within that hour. So hopefully that's clear enough for everyone. I am going to now do my best to share screen and post questions that came in. Let's see, looks like that's up. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. And so these first four, as you can see, the time denotation, these came from the chat. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ben Elsey from SPS, and we'll run through the questions, these first four, as they came in through the meeting last week. And we are trying to keep everything to the hour, given everyone's time. So we're, I think, going to try and be succinct here and see if there's time at the end. We'll see what further opportunities there are, but I think our whole goal here was to just field cleanup questions from the presentations last week. So with that, Ben, if we can turn it over to the first question here.
Sure. And Jay, before you get started, just a quick mic check. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Someone else verify.
For some reason, For some reason, I'm called into this meeting twice. It kicked me out and I called back in, and I've managed to double dial into a meeting. So as long as you can hear me, I can see the screen, we should be good to go.
Okay.
Yep, we can hear you fine, Ben. Thanks.
Okay, so Jay, I'll go ahead and, do you want me to read the questions and then answer the question?
Sure. Yeah, the first question's from Chad Crowley. Please go ahead.
Okay, so the first question is, how do you see load patterns shifting over the forecast period? I.e., how does the ELCC of technologies change in your view? Does wind ELCC increase over time if net load shifts to the morning/evenings? And does ELCC drastically reduce? If so, how rapidly and with what volume, with what build volume? So there's maybe a few questions embedded here. So I'll start with kind of the first part, which is how do you see load patterns shifting over time? And I think, Chad, if you're on, I don't want to speak to you here, but I think what you're referring to is net load patterns. so net of renewable production here based on the follow-up questions. So, traditionally, we've typically we have been concerned about the summer peak hour when we talk about a thermal heavy fleet. Now, as we start seeing increased penetrations of renewable generation and potentially solar generation, our focus shifts away from just the summer peak to a full 87, 60 hourly profile. So our loss of load hours, or the hours that are most critical, could be pretty much any time of the day. And usually what they actually follow is low wind production. So no longer are we necessarily cared about gross peak. What we're cared about is how do we respond to hours of load wind penetration. So that's how we see patterns changing over time, is we have an increased focus or increased need for not just dispatchable resources, but quick ramping, fast responding, quick starting resources. So how does ELCC change? Well, I think one thing we need to consider is ELCC is calculated on the SPP footprint, so it's not necessarily region specific. So we maybe don't see the drastic change one could expect if you were just looking at SPS, for example, but looking at over the entire BA, what we see for wind is it stays relatively flat. So wind is not a great capacity resource. So it starts at maybe about 20% today, and that's the same in the summer and the winter. And it declines over time, but it really bottoms out around 15%. So we don't see a huge change in wind ELCC accreditation in the summer or the winter. Solar is different. So solar obviously gets very poor accreditation in the winter, mainly because not just obviously reduced sun and reduced production, but also because our peaks in the winter tend to be early morning, late evening, so they don't necessarily correspond with solar production. So what we see with solar is it's relatively high summer accreditation, but when you get to about 20% 20 penetration across the entire SPP footprint, you see a pretty heavy drop off for solar accreditation. So it starts at maybe 70 to 80% currently, and then it drops down to somewhere in the region of 40 to 50%, maybe 60%, as you see 20% of the BA load across the entire SPP footprint.
I think that's a good summary, Ben. And I think I would add, I believe you have presented on this topic at least twice. One, I think in our first meeting at Roswell in discussing membership in the SPP, and then one of our last meetings, you put together additional materials on the sum of the parts methodology and how the ELCCs change for wind, solar, and batteries. So we have other reference materials. So I think with that, we'll move on to the next question. Sound good?
Works for me.
Okay.
Right.
I'll read it out. So James Hall sent
Okay.
this. Do you expect the LCOE inputs for wind and solar from NREL that were modeled to have significantly underestimated the real world costs you may see in the 2024 RFP?
So for solar, no. For solar, we did compare kind of the NREL cost to our 2022 RFP, and they were pretty well aligned. The one concern maybe we have is that NREL tends to underestimate the cost of wind, which is why I've urged some caution on the 3,500 megawatts. But when you take into account the transmission network upgrade costs we've added in, I actually think they're pretty aligned with what we would expect to see from an RFP now. And in fact, they may be slightly higher than we saw recently in our PSCO RFP.
Okay. Thanks. That's useful context, particularly the last part. Next question this is from Jeffrey Pollock, I believe is here. Is SPS going to consider the potential for adding SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors?
Yeah, so we haven't necessarily included SMRs in the modeling we've done to date. We focused our modeling on the hydrogen conversion CTs. But really, those hydrogen converted CTs were just a proxy for any carbon-free dispatchable technology. So I think you could start looking at subbing out those hydrogen conversions for SMRs if SMRs ended up being the more cost-effective, kind of reliable technology. So Jeff, to date, we haven't included it in our modeling. We are we would absolutely consider SMRs as an alternative carbon-free technology. And we talked about this a little bit internally. We may consider just putting some information into our IRP showing what the modeling would look like based on SMRs using NREL data as it stands today. We can maybe just give some additional information.
I think that would be a definite improvement, Ben. We're starting to see this appear in IRPs and other utilities more and more often now.
Okay, yeah, we're aiming to insert kind of just some information in the technology section, just describing SMRs and kind of the cost data that NREL have produced, and maybe incorporate just maybe a model run just to give you guys some indication of cost.
Sounds good.
And the next question is also from Jeff as well. Is SPS not alone in considering thousands of megawatts of new renewable resources? Should we be concerned that wind solar industry can accommodate all the demands for technology? Yeah,
so that's a valid question. It's a valid concern. There's two things I'd maybe point to there. Is first of all, you know, I've repeatedly said, I'm going to say the same thing over and over again today probably, is it's dependent upon what turns up into next year's RFP. So we've done all of our modeling based on generics, but next year we will issue an RFP, and these resources are going to have to, one, show up, and then also show up at kind of the price we were modeling. So we've got some protection there. Now, in terms of what's the pipeline maybe for renewable resources, I'm looking right now at the SPPQ in SPS's service territory. There's about 22,650 megawatts of projects that are within the pipeline currently with SPPQ. So I think it's a valid concern, but right now we certainly do see a pipeline that has sufficient amount of projects to meet our resource needs. And again, just we will have that protection if it has to show up to the RFP.
Okay. Thanks for that, Ben. I think we're going to move on to the PRC staff questions now. And I haven't seen if consultant is online yet or not. I haven't seen her in the chat. Don't see. Okay.
Jay, we do have a couple of folks from the PRC. Edison is here, and I think also his colleague Agatha Malik is on, both from the commission as well. So they may want to and Naomi Velasquez as well.
Okay, and Cynthia Mitchell is here with me. It's at Rilclaw.
Oh, okay. You guys are in the conference room. Got it.
We can't put our names inside of the chat because we're on a separate system.
Okay. Thank you.
That clears up everything. So thanks for that. Thanks for weighing in. So let's see, we're at 45 minutes. So I think, Ben, we wanted to run through the list of questions we have here to the extent that some of these are newer versus some are repeating. I think we're going to focus on the newer material first and then do any cleanup at the end on going over prior material that you've been asked about. So hopefully that's okay with everyone. But that covers most of these first questions. So I think this first one is quick. Scenario results are multi-jurisdictional and the ballpark split is approximately 50-50. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. On both accounts.
Okay. And then number two, does SPS have a preferred scenario of the four shown?
No, I don't think we have a preferred scenario per se. I think our intent, and I think this is kind of the part in italics now to Cynthia's question, is we're going to use the categories of dispatchable and variable energy resources to really quantify our resource need through the end of the decade. So when we come to issue the RFP next year, we'll say, hey, we're looking for 4,000 megawatts of variable energy resources and approximately 1,500 megawatts, just throwing some numbers out there, of dispatchable resources. And that would really give bidders an indication of the size and the timing of the need we're looking for. And then the actual preferred portfolio per se would be dependent upon the costs of the projects that then turn up to the RFP.
Okay. Unless there's question from the conference room that I think he covered that. Is there, we ready? Can we move on?
Yes,
Yes.
please. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. So that goes to number 3 for the base case that includes 700 megawatt CT and 837 combined cycle. Are the gas generation additions 40-year depreciation? And how would the PVRR, I believe, is present value revenue requirement change if modeled as a 20-year depreciation? And I assume that has to do with the compliance with the Energy Transition Act.
Yeah. So to answer the first question, yes, they are modeled currently as 40-year service lives of those units. If we were to go in, model them as a 20-year asset, then first we would have to determine whether we did that just for New Mexico or whether we did that for New Mexico and Texas. That would increase the cost of those scenarios if you were depreciating over a shorter period of time. I had one of our modelers, Jake, on our modeling team, did pull that information for me this morning. I don't know, Jay, if there's a way we can maybe just have a follow-up and I can just post the actual numbers to the GridWorks website after this meeting or maybe tomorrow. But I do have some actual numbers I can provide to Cynthia here.
Yeah, I mean, we can help support that, post that information. Do you have any summary of it that you can share?
No, at the moment, I just have a spreadsheet with a lot of lines on it where I'd have to kind of put it into a presentable format.
Okay. Just going to the folks in the conference room there. Do you have, so it sounds like Ben, they've done some additional work on this and we'll provide that information to the group. We can post on the website.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving, number 4, how were you able to force in LDS here, long duration storage?
Yeah, so we actually did not end up having to force in LDS. So we did talk about that, I think, Cynthia, where your comments coming from in one of our earlier meetings that we were going to force it in. What we actually did was we went back and looked at some other cost assumptions for long duration storage. And Mackenzie have a publicly available document that we can share with the team. We used their cost assumptions for LDS, and then using their cost assumptions, the model did select LDS without us having to force it in. Now, to the second part of the question, do you think the results are generally reasonable? I think the margin of error with emerging technologies, not just LDS, but also if you look at kind of the hydrogen conversions and potentially small modular reactors, when you're talking about those emerging technologies, it's all going to come down to the actual cost you see when they start bidding into solicitations and what you actually start seeing being built other than just pilot programs. So I think what we did was reasonable based on the maturity of the information we had. But I think the rubber really hits the road when you start seeing these projects being commercially installed and not just pilot programs.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Ben.
And
okay.
we can share the Mackenzie report also, just as maybe a link.
I would sometime like to see that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that update, Ben. Let's see, question number 5. I think that you modeled the long duration storage as a 100-hour resource. I think we had a few, I think this is a clarification, a few questions that came up last time, because you'd had the existing technologies were 4, 8 and 4, 6 and 8 hours, and then the long duration 100 hours. I think 2 questions on, is there anything in between, or does it choose some portions of those resources? Sorry, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so I took a look at the long duration storage after this question came across from Cynthia. And what's kind of interesting is there's very few occasions, if any, where the LDS is really dispatching at 100 hours. What we actually see is, even though it's capable of dispatching up to 100 hours, it's really dispatching for an hour here, 2 hours there, maybe 4 hours. So it's really dispatching like a short duration battery for the majority of the time, with just the capability of going up to 100 hours if it really needs to. So I actually don't think, based on the way it's being dispatched within Encompass right now, it would be that, it really provide much value, I should say, by evaluating, like, say, 72 hours, because quite frankly, it's not generating at 100 hours.
Okay,
So I think
that's interesting.
Sorry,
That's
Cynthia.
fine.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add, Cynthia, we had a lot of discussion internally on what does a 100-hour battery mean. Is it, you know, you essentially have to charge it and then dispatch it for 100 hours at a time? Is it got a minimum dispatch of 10 hours? And based on our pilot program that we're doing in Minnesota and PSGO, one of kind of the selling points on the battery that we're evaluating is the fact that it can dispatch for these very short bursts, you know, 1 hour at a time. So that's how we modeled it. And I think that's also another value stream that we're now capturing in Encompass that we didn't when we very first looked at these batteries.
Well, and so does that mean that you don't need a long duration storage, that you really are okay with short duration?
Well, I think there's two answers to that. So is most of the time you're good with short duration, but there's two reasons you're going to want long duration. Is even if it only dispatches once a year for the full 100 hours or twice a year for the full 100 hours, that still replaces the need for many, many 4-hour batteries. So even though it's not doing it frequently, just doing it once, twice, 3 times a year is enough to justify the need for LDS. Now, the other reason why you would want to look at long duration storage is going back to the very first question I answered, and that's the ELCC value of storage. The shorter the duration, the quicker that drop-off is to the accredited capacity. So as you start adding more 4-hour batteries to the system, the accredited capacity value drops off much, much quicker.
Okay.
The way we modeled a 100-hour battery was we gave it 100% accredited capacity for its entire life. So that's
Okay.
the other reason you would incorporate a long duration battery.
Okay, and if I can do just one short follow-up, then that also gets to the matter of being agnostic on dispatchable resources. Long duration hypothetically can dispatch like a combustion turbine, is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're modeling the long duration storage, is certainly the way we're modeling it now, essentially it acts exactly the same way as a CT does within the model. CTs rarely run for more than 100 hours continuously. So
That's what I thought,
the LDS
yeah.
works exactly the same as CT. Now, the couple of things we need to know about, or we need to understand with LDS, is one is the round trip efficiency. When you start looking at lithium ion commercially available batteries today, they have about an 85% round trip efficiency. So you put 100 megawatts in, you get 85 megawatts out. This long duration, the round trip efficiency is much lower. So you've got to put maybe 100 megawatts in to get 40 megawatt hours out. So that is maybe the drawback that you don't necessarily see from a CT, is just that efficiency, the in and out put.
Okay, thank you. I've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We all have. Let's see. The next question, we did get into this a little bit in the last meeting, but I think it's still worthwhile to go over. So this had to do the comparison between the different scenarios. There was the hydrogen conversion versus long duration storage. Reason the PVR for hydrogen gas is lower than long duration storage in near term, because there are no hydrogen conversion costs included. I don't know if that was, I think there was some incremental cost in the hydrogen case. It just wasn't as high as the others in the first time period. So I guess we don't have the results in front of us.
Yeah.
So I guess what was that increment versus just, you know, the non-hydrogen conversion to begin with, and then the extension is why was it lower in the beginning versus the long duration storage?
Yeah, so I'm going to clarify exactly where we are on the hydrogen conversion here. So on the multi-jurisdictional baseline cases, there is no hydrogen conversion costs at all on the multi-jurisdictional baseline. That includes gas generation that continues to essentially use methane, so it continues to just burn natural gas. On the hydrogen conversion case, we do include the hydrogen conversion cost. So there's an initial capital expenditure to convert those generators to burn hydrogen. There is a $250 million adder, capital adder, for every 2 CTs. So every time we add 2 CTs, we also include $250 million of capital to build new pipeline infrastructure. That's based on a 50-mile new gas line or hydrogen line, $5 million a mile. And then we do have the cost of hydrogen, 2033 burning 30% by volume, and then 2038 burning 96% by volume. Now, I think where this question was going is in the short term, so if you look at the period between 2024 and 2030, say, you don't have any actual hydrogen costs because you don't start burning hydrogen until 2033. I think that was the point we were getting at, but it does include the cost to convert the unit, and it includes the pipeline cost. It just doesn't include any hydrogen costs until we start blending in 2033 and then stepping up in 2038.
Oh, okay, Ben, that's helpful. I had not realized that when you add CTs, when you say add 2 CTs, you add 250 million for hydrogen pipeline, is what you said, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
great, thank you. Okay, and that is at the time of the CT edition.
Yes, we do it at the time of the CT edition.
Okay.
That clear that one up?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no, I think we had a few versions of that question, so that's good. Let's see. I think these next couple you may talk through, Ben, but we can go number 7, does long duration storage
Yeah, I
all
rewrote that question because it wasn't correct. Go to the clarification.
how much short duration storage is included in the long duration storage scenario?
And maybe now we don't need to discuss that. I understand that you modeled long duration, but it walks and talks most of the time like short duration, so.
Okay, and I do have those numbers as well. Jay, maybe if we can skip this question. I'm trying to find my spreadsheet. I had it open just a moment ago, and then we can circle back to 7 at the end, and I can give Cynthia the actual numbers as well. I did pull them.
Okay, and then we can post anything, after the fact as well. So, okay.
Thank you.
I think next one's pretty quick. Number 8, there are a handful of long duration storage technologies. Did you create a generic one from the costs and attributes? I guess put another way, Ben, you said you had used updated assumptions from McKinsey. Can you clarify what, how they treated the storage unit?
Yeah, so from memory, they did present multiple different technologies within their document, or they at least discussed them. The way we modeled it, though, just because they weren't specific for cost per technology, we used the technical characteristics of our pilot program. So the round trip efficiency, the maximum annual throughput, that was all based on Form Energy, which is our pilot program. And then we just used the cost stream from McKinsey's, which was just lumped as a single 100-hour cost type.
So the Form Energy technical characteristics from your Minnesota pilot, and then McKinsey has an aggregate cost curve.
That's correct. That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, number 9, for SPS 2024 RFP, will CTs be included or simply dispatchable resource? Does the New Mexico RFP process inform your service in Texas, and how?
Yeah, so we have no intention of specifying technologies within RFP. As I mentioned earlier, it would just be dispatchable and then wearable energy as a guide. And then does it inform Texas? Yes, absolutely. At the moment, we are planning, everything we have presented to date has been system-wide. So it includes Texas and New Mexico. We would love to continue planning and getting cost recovery across the two jurisdictions. We think that's in the best interest of our customers, offering the cheapest solution, the lowest cost solution. So we will issue an RFP for both jurisdictions. And then obviously we will have to evaluate the projects that come into the RFP with the understanding that ultimately Texas and New Mexico could potentially approve different portfolios, and then we would have to discuss the cost recovery mechanism there.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Moving on, number 10, for any gas generation that does bid into the RFP, yeah, will you require the hydrogen conversion costs, or that included in the evaluation? I guess, is that clear enough?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to what I was just saying is if we evaluate a CT or a gas unit within the RFP, we will certainly incorporate the hydrogen conversion costs. But definitely for the New Mexico proportion, we'll probably do it system-wide and then have to just break out those costs to show Texas the incremental cost of conforming with the New Mexico ETA.
Okay, and again, the hydrogen conversion cost is that 250 million per 2 CTs, but that was pipeline, and then there's conversion cost for the generating unit itself, right?
That's correct. Now, again, Cynthia, just keep in mind, we're coming up with that pipeline cost without really having identified any projects. So when an actual project comes into the RFP, then we'll be able to say, well, actually, it's not just this generic 50 miles at $5 million a mile, whatever we estimated. We'll actually be able to say, this is where the location is, and this is what we actually think a more accurate pipeline assumption would be. So those estimates will be hopefully much, much more accurate when we actually get to see real projects.
Okay, thank you.
All right, number 11. Let's see, I think it gets down to, it shows a need for almost 2 gigawatts of new dispatchable resources for long duration storage to fill that need. Seems like a heavy lift. Again, can you summarize possible opportunities for limited extensions of some units? Or I guess, I think another way to ask this is if you don't have long duration storage or for the full 2 gigawatts, or it's very expensive, you know, how are you evaluating and ultimately present some of these other options to the PRC? Is that I'm restating some of your question here, but is that the gist of what you're trying to get at here?
Right.
Yes. So bear with me just 1 second while I pull up some information just on my screen so I can give you some actual numbers. I think we've got around about 4, let me just make sure I'm not misstating any of these units. Sorry, I copied one too many. Bear with me.
Ben, you want me to stop sharing here?
No, it's okay. I can give you these numbers. So we have at least 4 gas steam units that are scheduled to retire between that 28 and 2030 time period. Those 4 units total 514 megawatts. So I think, Cynthia, to your question is, if we don't get enough proposals or the proposals are a higher cost than we anticipate, then we will absolutely do a kind of sensitivity analysis and say, hey, if we were to extend a gas steam unit by 3 years, 4 years, a relatively short duration, maybe up to its next planned overhaul, planned outage, would that alleviate some of the pressures that we're seeing from the RFP? And we actually just did that in our 2022 RFP. We recommended a 18-month extension of a gas steam unit until we could get the solar replacement generation online, for example. So that's something we've done in the past and we will continue to do and at least present that information to both the Texas PUC and then the New Mexico PRC.
Okay, thank you. And I thought you had already done one extension, so thank you.
Okay, so we got clarification there?
Yeah.
Okay, number 12. Can you explain the SPS's opportunities for purchases within the SPP?
Yep. So as a member of the Southwest Power Pool, technically we bid all of our energy or all of our resources into the SPP, and then we purchase all of our native load, all of our energy needs from the SPP. So whenever we do economic analysis, so Encompass, for example, right now, and I may be off by plus or minus 50 megawatts here, but we have an import capability from the SPP of about 1,850 megawatts. Now we need to reserve the single largest contingency, which is currently one of the total units, 540 megawatts. So that means we can purchase in any given hour, and this is how we model it, about 1,300 megawatts, from the SPP market. Likewise, at any given hour, we can sell, we don't need to withhold our single largest contingency, so we can sell up to 1,800 megawatts of energy into the SPP market at any given time. So when we do our analyses, we essentially treat that market import or export capability as a resource. So maybe restate that.
You said when you do your modeling, you always include that import capability of the 1,300?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. We haven't seen a full loads and resources chart, so I don't think I've seen anything that has the imports on it, so thank you.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the question 13 is about the cost inputs on the hydrogen gas. Please clarify whether this is green or blue. And well, can you please provide sources references for these costs? I guess the question is what further updates are there from some of that materials provided in either prior presentations or some of the work? So I guess, Ben, what updates are there? And then again, clarify green or blue.
Yeah, so for the color of hydrogen, we've made no assumptions on whether the hydrogen's green or blue. We have just assumed there is going to be an external hydrogen market at some point in the future. Okay. So we assumed the pipeline cost, the $250 million that I was describing earlier per 2 CTs, and then also the conversion cost of a CT, which was $20-ish million extra from memory. And then we just evaluated the cost of hydrogen $1 a kilogram, which is about the equivalent of $7.40 an MMBTU. And I can't remember exactly where the $1 a kilogram was coming from, but if I recall correctly, the Sierra Club had maybe made that recommendation based on an EPA report. I'd have to dig out the link. I could forward that to you guys.
I got that. Ben, did you say the pipeline transport cost is 250 or 350 million?
250.
Okay. And then 28 million per CT to convert the actual, okay.
Cynthia, that number's 15 million that we modeled.
What'd you say?
Oh, it's 20.
It's 15, 1-5.
Oh, okay. I thought you said
Million,
28.
Not 20.
Okay.
So 1.5 for the CT, and then CCs were assumed to be 50 million for the conversion.
55?
So, nope, 50, just 50.
Okay.
And yes, the $1 per kilogram was from like an EPA.
Okay.
But it's also in the McKinsey report that we can publish. They have it in there, some graphs of hydrogen.
Thanks, Jake.
Cynthia, were there any further, was that sufficient on question 13?
I think I got it.
Okay, I guess just to clarify, Ben, I mean, I think you guys have been updating your input assumptions on this as you've been doing the work, but certainly I mean, I guess where will this be documented in full in its final version? And where and when?
I'm glad you asked that question, Jay, because we just had a review call before this one, looking at our IRP document. In section 7 of our IRP, we are making all of these input assumptions public and available. So we will have all of our cost and our technical characteristics assumptions within section 7 of the IRP.
Okay, and that'll be submitted in the final version to the PRC.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, we have had opportunity for feedback and review input assumptions along the way, and you guys have been updating these. So it's been iterative, but that's kind of the final step here of this process. Any other questions from the PRC folks?
No, we're good, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then on 14, I think there's some overlap here, but right, these were partly some of the questions that the Sierra Club asked on the treatment and conversion related to the EPA.
Well, and maybe I can just cut this down. I'm just trying to understand why you bring in your conversion costs starting in 2032. And is it because of the section 111 requirement implying for green, and then you're otherwise agnostic on whether your hydrogen fuel is green or blue?
Yeah, so when we talked about the hydrogen conversion scenario, you know, one of the first questions we asked Cynthia is, when do we start blending hydrogen? Because if we look at just the Energy Transition Act, there's kind of no interim step for blending hydrogen. We essentially have a renewable portfolio standard go through 2040, and then we switch to 100% carbon-free end of 2044. So we wanted to show like an interim step where we would start blending hydrogen and obviously decreasing carbon emissions for those CTs. The Sierra Club had made the suggestion that we model a scenario where we incorporated the EPA 111D. So we kind of killed two birds with one stone, and we just said, you know what, we'll incorporate 111D as part of our base case assumptions. So that's really where that 30% by 2033 or 32, I think it's end of 32, and then the 96% by 38 came from.
Okay, and then by taking that as your base assumption on hydrogen, that the EP section 111 requirement then gives you financial benefits, right?
I don't know if 111, and I'm a little bit outside my depth here, Cynthia, so I can certainly follow up on this. I'm not sure if 111 potentially gives us financial benefits, but there may be some production tax credits that are available for hydrogen blending at that point in time.
Okay, now I need to study up on that requirement anyway. Thank you.
Okay, we good on that. Cynthia, you said you cut it down. Is that one we covered that one?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay. On 15, this has to do with the load forecast, Ben. Could we get the electrification forecast by year and breakdown by oil and gas loads and other industry and large C&I loads, including such loads as data servers with self-generation capability?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just real quickly, we can certainly provide our demand and energy forecast by year. That's not a problem at all. Just as a reminder, under the electrification scenario, we used the S&P Global study that came from some of the O&G companies, and we incorporated all of that load growth, and we assumed 0 behind the meter generation. So in some respects, you could say that was a high bookend because we assumed SPS served all of that load. However, what we didn't include was any additional large C&I loads. So we did not include any additional data centers, for example, or clean fuels production outside of what's already embedded within our lower load forecast. So this is a long way of me saying that, yes, we can provide the information. At the moment, it's 100% oil and gas and 0 other large C&I customers. And our thought process there being, if some of that oil and gas load is served by behind the meter generation, that would probably give some headroom for some other technologies, data centers being the obvious example, to step into that kind of that load and energy that we were serving or planning to serve.
Okay, and so I'd like to say that that staff doesn't need this in advance of your filing. I assume it'll be in your filing, and then you've seen a couple of my topic items for possible action plan discussion that we're going to have in a week, and it goes to this matter about behind the meter load. So we'll just talk about this further when we get to that discussion.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Segue to next week. Come back and tune in. Last question. I think you may have just covered, Ben. Right, Cynthia, you're asking for updated LCOE or levelized cost of electricity for all new resources. Ben, you said you guys are finalizing your input assumptions for the final draft. Is that...
Well, and I guess I just wanted to clarify that I had heard Ben say that SPS does calculate LCOE for the resources. And that at some point we'll have a worksheet that shows us that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben, you want to take that?
Yeah, I do just want to clarify, because we do not do LCOE for every resource. So we do LCOE for predominantly energy resources. So LCOE for wind and solar, for example. And then we do LCOC, so levelized cost of capacity, for dispatchable resources for the most part, batteries, CTs. So when we look at the costs that would be included within our IRP, you're going to see some will be presented on $1 per megawatt hour basis. Wind and solar, for example, would be $20, $30 a megawatt hour. And then batteries and CTs will be presented on $1 per kW month basis. So a battery may be $10 a kW month. So there is a slight difference based on whether it's predominantly energy or predominantly capacity, but the process is essentially the same.
Okay, that's right. And thanks for reminding me of that distinction between the capacity and energy. And it is possible, though, with that data to do comparisons across capacity and energy too as well.
Oh yeah. So the only thing that changes in that calculation is the denominator, whether it's energy or megawatts. Capacity is the denominator. So if you wanted to, you can reverse them out, reverse engineer them, and calculate them into the opposite metric.
Right. Okay, thank you.
That brings us to the end of the list. I think, Ben, you said you may have some other additional material on 7. I don't know if that's available now or at some subsequent point.
I'm just going to, just bear with me for literally 30 seconds. If I can't find it very, very quickly, I'll move on, but I'm pretty sure I know which spreadsheet it's in. Since I did the work, I don't want to miss it.
I would love to see it, thank you.
I guess just while he goes through that, Cynthia, we're good with your list of questions here?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Now our process here was we had asked everyone to submit their questions by Friday. So we covered everything that's been submitted. Ben's been overly generous with his time. So I think trying to wrap this up and move to next week's action plan discussion, maybe while Ben prepares. Margie, do you want to do another plug on the survey form and so receiving input prior to next week's meeting?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And Deb, if you get a moment, perhaps you can put in the chat the link to the SPS survey instrument on action plan ideas. We'd like to ask people to put your action plan suggestions into the form that we've got established for this, including your name and email address, so that we can be sure to follow up with you if we have questions. And if you can do that by the day before our next meeting, which I believe is the 13th. So by the 12th at noon. If you don't have access to Google Docs, please send a specific email to info@gridworks.org. That's got your suggestion along with your name and email. Of course, you can, as many suggestions as you have are allowed. And so thanks for giving that some thought. We'll share the collective responses at the next meeting, and that might provide inspiration from some folks, or we may even see some similar items that will combine and discuss with the group, which are the priority actions that the group would like to consider. Thanks, Jay.
That's perfect. Ben, have you been able to find the spreadsheet?
I am just building a pivot table right now. If
Oh my God.
people want to just give me 30 seconds. And Jake, I just see you sent your team's message. Do you have it?
It depends on what scenario you were looking at. I just did the 15 existing the LDS versus.
Yeah, it would need. So I've got it here. Let me just share my screen, and
I'll stop.
And I apologize for the presentation that this is extremely rough right now. But when we look at batteries, short duration, we're in the realm of 1,500 megawatts, and then long duration is 4,000 megawatts. So if we look maybe, Cynthia, in a shorter time period, so through that 28 through 2030 time frame, it's 1,500 megawatts of short duration and 430 megawatts of long duration. So maybe it's a 75-25% split on the short term. And then as you start going out through the future, then it just continues to add more and more long duration storage as we go. And then it kind of flips where it's mostly long duration being added in the 2030s.
And you said in the long term, it gets up to 4,000 megawatts long duration, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So Ben, we are not seeing your screen. If this is something you would also like us to post, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, it just says has started screen sharing. You talked through it, but
okay. Yeah, maybe I'll just repeat because I just assumed everyone could see my screen. So just 28 to 2030 of the kind of the 2,000 megawatts of storage the models add in, about 75% of that is short duration. And then in the 2030s and beyond, the model is currently just continuously adding long duration storage. So it goes from 1,500 megawatts of short duration, 400 megawatts of long duration. The 1,500 megawatts of short duration continues, it doesn't increase. And then the model just keeps adding more long duration until it gets to about 4,500 megawatts total in 2043.
Ben, can I ask maybe one thing? Because I believe you said on question number 3, the question on the different depreciation terms, you're going to send some follow-up spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Maybe if we can, I'll work with you offline, and we'll get this as well, and we can post that to the GridWorks website.
Absolutely, that's not a problem.
You talk through everything. I can picture it in my head, but we can kind of solidify the documentation here, if that's okay.
Yeah, that will work, and it was a really pretty pivot table as well. Everyone's got to miss, so we will make sure we get that out to you.
let's see, I think that covers all the questions that were submitted. So I think with that, we're gonna wrap up and look forward to the meeting next week. I don't know, I don't have anything further to add other than to thank everyone for their participation. Thank the PRC for putting the questions together, your team there, Ben for being flexible and fielding everything, trying to produce tables on the spot. It's all pretty impressive. So thanks for that, being responsive. And I don't know, Margie, I think that's it for me. We'll try and bring this to close on time and look forward to seeing everyone next week.
Great. Again,
Thanks,
also
everyone.
thank you to all of you and to the SPS Excel team for accommodating this extra question and answer session. Reminder that our next meeting is September the 13th, next week from 1 to 3 p.m. on Zoom, and you should have email invitations from Deborah Shields. We'll get another reminder out next week with any read ahead materials, but primarily we're going to focus on discussion about the action plan, and also we'll look for your suggestions on recommendations for the action plan by noon on the 12th, and we'll bring a synopsis of that to the meeting on the 13th. Thank you.